Logan Marr was not invisible. He was simply ignored. A system that failed a child. The death of Logan Marr. In 2001, a 5-year-old boy named Logan Marr was living under state protection in Maine. He had been removed from his biological family and placed into foster care, a system created to protect children from harm and neglect. Logan was not missing, and he was not hidden. His location was known, his caregiver was licensed, and his case was documented through official reports and routine visits. This documentary examines the life and death of Logan Marr, not as an unsolved crime, but as a case of institutional failure. A story about responsibility, accountability, and the consequences of ignoring warning signs when a child has no voice. This is not the story of a missing child. There was no search, no unanswered mystery, and no unknown suspect waiting to be identified. Logan Marr was already inside the system designed to protect children like him. His location was known, his caregivers were approved, his case file existed. And yet, the protection that was promised to him failed at every critical point. What happened to Logan cannot be reduced to a single moment or a single decision. This story is not only about the actions of one adult, but about a chain of institutional neglect that allowed those actions to continue. Logan was not invisible. He was simply ignored. In the United States, the foster care system exists to remove children from unsafe environments and place them under state protection. Once a child enters that system, responsibility no longer rests solely with individuals. It shifts to agencies, supervisors, caseworkers, and policies meant to prevent harm. On paper, this structure appears strong. In practice, Logan's life revealed how easily it can collapse. Logan was 5 years old. He could not advocate for himself, document his fear, or challenge the conditions he lived under. Adults made decisions on his behalf. Reports were written, home visits were conducted, files were reviewed and signed. Yet despite this constant interaction with the system, the reality of Logan's daily life went largely unseen and unchallenged. This case matters because it forces an uncomfortable question. What happens when a system designed to protect children becomes passive instead of protective? Logan's story is not about disappearance. It is about presence and the failure to act when the warning signs were already there. Logan Marr was born in 1998 in Maine, a small northeastern state where cases like his rarely made national headlines at the time. He was an ordinary child in every visible way, a preschool-aged boy with no public profile, no media presence, and no voice outside the adults who spoke for him. His life, at least on paper, was documented through reports and evaluations rather than memories and photographs shared with the public. Logan lived with his biological mother during the first years of his life. She was described in official records as having intellectual disabilities, a factor that would later play a central role in the state's decision-making. Authorities concluded that she was unable to provide adequate care for a young child. Based on those assessments, Logan was removed from her custody and placed under the supervision of Maine's child welfare system. Once Logan entered foster care, his life became defined by placements, evaluations, and transitions. He was not removed because of abuse or violence, but because of concerns about long-term care and stability. From the system's perspective, the goal was protection. From Logan's perspective, his life was quietly reorganized by people he barely knew, inside environments he had no control over. At 5 years old, Logan had no understanding of why he was being moved, who was responsible for him, or how long any placement would last. His daily reality depended entirely on the adults assigned to his case. His safety, comfort, and emotional well-being were not things he could request or refuse. They were decisions made elsewhere, often far from the rooms where he actually lived. By the time Logan was placed with his final foster caregiver, he was already a child shaped by instability. Official records described him as quiet and compliant, characteristics that rarely triggered alarm within an overburdened system. There was no indication that he was considered high risk. He was not flagged as a child in immediate danger. In the system's eyes, Logan was one of many cases progressing without urgency. What makes this part of the story important is not what Logan did, but what was done around him. He was not a child the system believed was failing. He was a child the system believed it had already saved. Logan Marr was 5 years old. He could not choose where he lived. The system chose for him. When Logan Marr was removed from his mother's care, the decision was framed as an act of protection. The state of Maine assumed legal responsibility for his safety, his living conditions, and his daily supervision. From that moment forward, Logan's well-being was no longer a private matter. It became a matter of public duty, governed by policies, approvals, and oversight procedures designed to prevent harm. The foster care system relies on the idea that screened and approved caregivers can provide a safe alternative to biological families deemed unfit. Foster parents are evaluated, trained, and licensed. Their homes are inspected. Caseworkers are assigned. Regular visits are scheduled. On paper, each of these steps exists to ensure that no child is left alone with unchecked authority. Logan's placement followed this exact process. Sally Schofield was not an emergency placement. She was not an unverified caregiver operating outside the system. She was a licensed foster parent, previously approved by state agencies and described as experienced and structured. There were no immediate red flags in her official file that would have automatically disqualified her from caring for a young child. From the system's perspective, Logan had been placed in a controlled and supervised environment. Oversight, however, depended heavily on routine. Home visits were conducted on a scheduled basis, often with advance notice. Interactions between Logan and his caregiver were observed briefly and in limited contexts. What happened behind closed doors outside those visits remained largely invisible. The system assumed compliance rather than actively testing for risk. Discipline methods inside foster homes were subject to regulation, but enforcement relied on disclosure and detection. Practices such as isolation or confinement were prohibited, yet they could exist undetected if not reported or witnessed. In Logan's case, the mechanisms meant to identify harmful discipline failed to function in real time. There was no immediate intervention, no escalation, and no disruption of the placement. What makes this system relevant to Logan's death is not a lack of rules, but a lack of effective enforcement. The safeguards existed, but they did not adapt to what Logan was actually experiencing. By the time the system reacted, it was no longer acting as protection. It was responding to a fatal outcome. In the weeks leading up to Logan Marr's death, there were signs that something inside the foster home was wrong. They were not dramatic warnings or formal complaints filed through official channels. Instead, they appeared as fragments, sounds overheard, behaviors noticed, and small details that, when viewed separately, did not trigger immediate alarm. Neighbors later reported hearing prolonged crying coming from the house. The crying was described as intense and repetitive, not the brief outbursts typically associated with a young child adjusting to a new environment. These sounds were not accompanied by visible signs of play or comfort. They suggested distress, but there was no clear mechanism for those observations to reach the people responsible for Logan's oversight. During scheduled visits, Logan was described as quiet and withdrawn. He did not display visible injuries. He did not make verbal disclosures about his treatment. In a system that often relies on obvious physical indicators, his behavior did not rise to the level of an emergency. Silence was interpreted as stability rather than fear. The structure of foster care oversight played a critical role in how these warnings were missed. Visits were planned in advance, allowing caregivers to prepare. Interactions were brief and limited to specific spaces within the home. There was little opportunity to observe daily routines or disciplinary practices in real time. What was meant to be supervision became procedural rather than investigative. One of the most significant warning signs, the use of isolation as punishment, went undiscovered. Logan was being confined to a bedroom with a door that could be secured from the outside. This was a clear violation of foster care regulations. Yet without an unannounced inspection or a direct report, the practice continued without interruption. These warning signs did not fail because they were invisible. They failed because they were fragmented, indirect, and never connected into a single narrative of risk. No single observation was enough to trigger removal. No single report demanded immediate action. And in that gap between individual signals and institutional response, Logan remained unprotected. On March 29, 2001, Logan Marr was inside the foster home where he had been placed by the state of Maine. There was no emergency call that morning, no outside disturbance, and no indication that this day would end differently from the others that had come before it. The events that followed unfolded entirely within the walls of a home that had been officially approved as safe. According to the investigation, Sally Schofield was alone in the house with Logan that day. At some point, she decided to discipline him. What prompted that decision was not described as an extraordinary incident. It was presented as a routine behavioral issue, something she believed required control rather than care. Instead of supervision or separation through safe means, she chose a method that placed Logan in direct physical danger. Logan was taken to his bedroom, a space that had already been used for isolation as punishment. A cord-like object was placed around his neck and attached to the door handle. The stated purpose was to prevent him from leaving the room. In reality, the setup created a restraint that applied pressure to his neck whenever he moved or lost balance. Logan was 5 years old, small, and physically incapable of understanding or escaping what had been done to him. At some point after Logan was restrained, he became unresponsive. Schofield later claimed she found him motionless. Emergency services were contacted, and responders arrived at the house. Logan was transported to a hospital, but medical personnel determined that he had already died. Attempts to revive him were unsuccessful. An autopsy later confirmed that Logan died from asphyxiation caused by strangulation. The pressure applied to his neck prevented oxygen from reaching his brain. Medical examiners determined that the death was not accidental and not consistent with an unforeseeable mishap. It was the result of a restraint method that was inherently dangerous and entirely preventable. There were no signs of a struggle that would suggest Logan had caused his own death. There was no evidence that the restraint was necessary for safety. The physical findings aligned with a prolonged loss of oxygen rather than a sudden, unavoidable event. From a medical standpoint, Logan's death was the direct outcome of an adult's actions, carried out in a setting where a child should have been protected. By the end of that day, the foster care system that had assumed responsibility for Logan Marr was no longer overseeing his life. It was responding to his death. In the hours following Logan Marr's death, investigators began to reconstruct what had happened inside the foster home. The focus quickly narrowed to Sally Schofield, the only adult present at the time and the person legally responsible for Logan's care. There was no confusion about access, opportunity, or authority. Logan had been placed in her custody by the state, and his safety was her direct responsibility. Schofield's initial statements described the incident as a disciplinary measure that had gone wrong. She did not deny restraining Logan, nor did she dispute the physical setup found in the bedroom. The question investigators faced was not whether she had acted, but whether her actions constituted criminal behavior rather than a tragic mistake. That distinction became central to the case. Physical evidence inside the room supported a clear sequence of events. The cord attached to the door handle, the position of Logan's body, and the marks on his neck aligned with the medical examiner's findings. There was no indication that Logan had created the situation himself. He had not improvised the restraint, nor could he have understood the danger it posed. The setup required planning, intent, and control by an adult. As investigators examined Schofield's background, they found no record of sudden instability or external crisis that day. She was not acting under immediate threat. She was not responding to an emergency. The restraint was used as punishment, not protection. This distinction mattered because it demonstrated a conscious decision to use a method that placed a child at risk. Attention also turned to the broader chain of responsibility. While Schofield's actions caused Logan's death, the system that placed him in her care came under scrutiny. Caseworkers, supervisors, and oversight procedures were reviewed. Investigators asked how a prohibited form of discipline could exist inside a licensed foster home without detection. Although these questions did not shift criminal liability, they shaped the public understanding of the case. Ultimately, responsibility for Logan's death was not abstract or ambiguous. It rested with the adult who restrained him. The legal system would later address systemic failures separately, but the criminal case moved forward with a clear conclusion. Logan Marr died because the person entrusted with his care used control instead of protection. Following the investigation, Sally Schofield was formally arrested and charged in connection with Logan Marr's death. Prosecutors did not treat the case as a simple accident or an unforeseeable tragedy. From the beginning, the focus was on whether her actions demonstrated a reckless disregard for human life, particularly the life of a child placed in her care by the state. The charge brought against Schofield reflected the severity of that assessment. She was accused of acting with depraved indifference, a legal standard used when an individual knowingly engages in conduct that creates a high risk of death. The prosecution argued that restraining a 5-year-old child by the neck, even under the label of discipline, met that threshold. This was not framed as a momentary lapse in judgment, but as a conscious choice with predictable consequences. During court proceedings, the details of Logan's final day were presented alongside expert testimony. Medical professionals explained how the restraint caused asphyxiation and why death would have been unavoidable once oxygen deprivation reached a critical point. Investigators described the physical setup in the bedroom and emphasized that the method used violated foster care regulations and basic child safety principles. The defense maintained that Schofield had not intended to kill Logan and characterized the incident as a disciplinary action that escalated unintentionally. While intent to kill was debated, the court focused on responsibility rather than motive. The central question was whether a reasonable adult, particularly one approved as a foster caregiver, should have understood the danger of such actions. The answer, according to the court, was clear. In 2002, Sally Schofield was convicted of manslaughter. The verdict acknowledged that while the death may not have been premeditated, it resulted from actions that showed a profound disregard for a child's safety. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison, a punishment reflecting both the loss of life and the breach of trust involved in the case. Schofield ultimately served approximately 12 years of her sentence before being released on parole in 2013. Her release reignited public discussion about accountability, punishment, and the lasting impact of Logan Marr's death. For the legal system, the case had reached its conclusion. For many observers, the outcome raised lingering questions about whether justice could ever fully address the failures that led to a child's death. Logan Marr's death did not end with a verdict in a courtroom. Once the details of his case became public, the focus shifted beyond the individual who caused his death and toward the system that had placed him in harm's way. Public attention turned to how a licensed foster home, operating under state supervision, could become the setting for a preventable child death. Media coverage intensified scrutiny of Maine's child welfare system. Questions were raised about foster parent screening, the frequency and depth of home visits, and the effectiveness of oversight mechanisms meant to detect abuse or dangerous discipline practices. Logan's case exposed the gap between policy and enforcement, revealing how rules designed to protect children could exist without being actively applied. State officials acknowledged failures within the foster care system. Reviews were conducted to examine how Logan's placement had been monitored and why warning signs were not identified earlier. Particular attention was given to the use of isolation and confinement as discipline, practices that were already restricted but had not been adequately enforced. Logan's death forced these issues into public view. In the years following the case, changes were made within Maine's foster care framework. Oversight procedures were revised and restrictions on disciplinary methods were clarified and reinforced. Greater emphasis was placed on unannounced visits and closer observation of living conditions inside foster homes. Logan Marr's case became a reference point in discussions about child welfare reform, cited as an example of what can happen when supervision becomes routine rather than protective. Despite these changes, the outcome could not alter what had already been lost. Logan was not a child who slipped through the cracks unnoticed. He was documented, placed, and monitored on paper. His death highlighted a truth that extended beyond one state or one system. Protection does not fail because children are invisible. It fails when responsibility is diluted and urgency disappears. Logan Marr was not missing. He was present, known, and entrusted to a system that promised safety. His story endures not as a mystery, but as a warning, a reminder that systems designed to protect children must be actively vigilant, because when they are not, the cost is measured in lives that cannot be replaced. He was not invisible. He was simply ignored. Logan Marr was not a missing child. What happened to Logan was not caused by a lack of rules. This story is not about a mystery that could not be solved. It is about a failure that could have been prevented. He was simply ignored. Next on True Echoes. One child died under state protection. Another would follow years later, despite repeated warnings and documented abuse. His name was Gabriel Fernandez. And once again, the system was watching and failed to stop it. The warnings were written down. The abuse was reported. Gabriel Fernandez. The system failed again. The truth coming soon on True Echoes. Logan Marr was 5 years old when his life ended inside a system that promised protection. Logan Marr was not invisible. He was simply ignored. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk. And step into the echoes of truth. To be continued.